when I look at what happened in 2020, it was the biggest marketing campaign I've ever seen. You know, I've done marketing campaigns for companies and things in organizations, churches, things like that. So you're thinking of like flyers, ads, video content, and then it was like for a period of time, you couldn't walk anywhere without giant billboards about masking up, putting this, this thing in your arm. And then there's this like undercurrent of anger and fear of people. If you weren't wearing a mask, all of a sudden you're public enemy number one. And so they're putting all this fear, like you said, but then you have these very simple options that some of them, like ivermectin, won a Nobel Prize for its ability to help people globally. And so now we're taking those options from people, waiting until people are so sick that they're hospitalized, and then only giving them an option that isn't going to help them but could actually make the problem worse. How is that not criminal in my mind?
To this day, there's no chief of medicine in the United States or anywhere in the world who's willing to step out and say that that was the right approach. There's not a single hospital in our country or anywhere in the world that claims to be a center of excellence for treating COVID. The only reason why that can be the case is they know they didn't do the best they could for patients. They know that. There's a principle called medication reconciliation, which says if patients are on drugs at home and they get sicker, they should always continue those drugs through the hospital. They have the right to do that. So if we had started them on ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, nasal sprays and gargles, colchicine, prednisone, etc., they should have been continued in the hospital. Dr. J.J. Roster from Florida published the ICON study in chest in 2020, ivermectin. It reduced mortality by 50% for hospitalized patients. Every single patient in the United States should have received ivermectin during their hospital stay. Every single patient hospitalized in the United States should have received upfront monoclonal antibodies in the ER. They were safe and effective. We had bought enough monoclonal antibodies for every sick person in the United States to receive them. And sadly, a tiny fraction of people received early treatment. Now, those who were blessed enough to get early treatment, most widely used was McCullough protocol, they weren't hospitalized and they didn't die. They survived. And in my practice, I treated people in their 90s, people on oxygen at home, all these medical problems, heart failure, atrial fibrillation, emphysema, and I pulled them through. Sadly, we heard stories about people, in their 50s and 60s, many times with obesity, diabetes, other problems, getting no early treatment and then succumbing in the hospital. Here in Dallas, it was 2-to-1 African Americans and Hispanics dying over Caucasians. And it was a tragedy. It was because of lack of access to early treatment.
Wow. Okay. So your hypothesis, which I would, looking at this, from an outsider's perspective, it seems like it's true that the only thing that they were really trying to do is to get people to comply to this jab, basically. If we're trying to be careful with the language we're using for YouTube, we love you. But here we are. Now it's crazy. It's crazy that we actually have to be that careful with the language we're using because there's such a clamp down on the narrative. It's like the narrative is these things work, they're good. In fact, there were so many different things being like discussed and bills being, passed around about if you want to fly domestically, you need to have, a vaccine card. And if you want to work in a company of 100 or more people, it's like, it was insane. And what do you think is the motive behind that?
Well, let me ask you, it's December 10th, 2020. How did they know the products were safe and effective? There was only 1 month of administering them, shot 1, shot 2. Then there's only 2 months of observation.
I can't imagine there's a lot of data to be able to see if they're safe. Especially with long-term results.
There were no reductions in hospitalizations and deaths. They were sparse. Intent to treat principles weren't followed. There wasn't equal testing. Lots of sources of bias. We were told a 90% reduction in just the binary occurrence of getting the upper respiratory symptoms. How did anybody know on month 4 what was going to happen? How did they know? They couldn't have known. Here's the point. What's unique about this product class is an ideology, and it goes back hundreds of years. hundreds of years. And it starts out with smallpox and then rabies and measles and polio. And it goes like this. It says, listen, human beings are frail, vulnerable to infectious disease threats, and through the brilliance of mankind, through this form of science, we can make the human body stronger and more resilient. We can actually improve upon God's creation. It's the ultimate hubris of the arrogance of man expressed in medical science. It's the ultimate.